Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
This time, we're heading to a place that's equal parts history and hauntings, the Stanley Hotel.
Ah, yes. The Stanley.
Yeah, if that name rings a bell, it's probably because of The Shining.
Stephen King, room 217.
Exactly. But trust me, there's a whole lot more to this place than just that spooky connection. We're talking 140 rooms, a grand colonial revival style, right there in Estes Park, Colorado, practically in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. And the story starts way before Stephen King ever checked in.
Well, it all starts with the man who built the place, F.O. Stanley.
Stanley, as in the Stanley steamer.
One and the same.
Right.
Early 1900s, this titan of the automobile industry gets diagnosed with tuberculosis.
Consumption, as they called it back then.
Right. And was a doctor's order, fresh air, sunshine, and good food. Basically, head for the mountains. So that's what Stanley did. Landed himself in Estes Park, Colorado.
It worked.
Like a charm. Stanley's health bounced back, and he fell in love with the place.
You know, there's something kind of poetic about it. This guy, famous for building cars, finds healing in nature.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Estes Park, at the time, it was all about rustic simplicity. Great for the lungers seeking the fresh air cure, but not exactly luxurious.
And I'm guessing F.O. Stanley, the car magnate, was used to a little bit of luxury.
A little bit. He wanted to bring his whole East Coast social circle to this mountain paradise. So he had this vision to turn Estes Park into a full-blown resort town, but with an elegance you wouldn't expect way out there.
So he sets out to build this grand hotel. Did he just, pick a spot and start construction?
Actually, the land itself has a whole backstory. Before Stanley, it was owned by this, well, kind of controversial figure.
Yeah.
The 4th Earl of Dunraven and Mount Earl.
An earl? What's an English earl doing in Colorado?
He had these grand plans to turn the area into a massive private hunting preserve.
Uh-oh. Bet the locals loved that.
Not one bit. They fought him tooth and nail. In fact, when Stanley was thinking of naming the hotel after Dunraven,
Big mistake.
you got it. The locals basically sent him a petition, on buckskin no less, begging him not to do it.
Wow. Bad blood. Much. Okay, so new owner, fresh start. Stanley gets to work building this dream hotel. What did he have in mind?
Thinking cutting edge, top of the line, 1909 style. Electricity, telephones in every room, private bathrooms. Practically unheard of at the time.
Talk about luxury.
And get this, he had his car company create a whole fleet of steam-powered mountain wagons to shuttle guests up from the train station in Lyon.
No expense spared, but grand openings don't always mean smooth sailing, right? Any hiccups along the way?
Oh yeah, just a year later, boom, gas explosion rocked the hotel.
Yikes.
And this is where things get a bit murky. The newspapers from back then, they can't even agree on basic facts.
But like what?
Like the name of the maid who got hurt. Some say it was Elizabeth Lambert, others say Elizabeth Wilson. Even the details of her injuries, how bad the damage was, it all depends on who you ask.
A real historical mystery. Okay, so putting aside the drama for a minute, let's talk about the building itself. The Stanley Hotel, it's this grand colonial revival structure. Kind of stands out amongst those rugged mountains, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It was a very deliberate choice. Remember, Stanley wanted to attract those East Coast elites. And for them, the colonial revival style, it was like stepping back in time to a simpler, more American past.
So he brings the East Coast vibe to the Wild West.
Exactly. And you can't forget about the health aspect.
Yeah.
The wide verandas, the emphasis on fresh air circulation, the south-facing views. It wasn't just about looking fancy. It was about promoting well-being.
He was really taking that whole lung cure thing seriously.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Sherman Grant Bonney, the tuberculosis expert, he even featured a picture of Stanley's summer house in Estes Park in his book, Pulmonary Tuberculosis. That's how much Stanley was into this whole healthy living thing.
So we've got luxury, we've got fresh air, we've got stunning mountain views. Sounds like a pretty idyllic spot, but I'm guessing it wasn't all about just relaxing and taking in the scenery, right?
You're right about that. The Stanley was designed for socializing. Back then, these grand hotels, they were like little worlds unto themselves, with their own rhythms and rituals.
Like a stage for the social dances of the early 1900s.
Exactly. And the Stanley had the perfect spaces for it all. Want to take a look?
Lead the way.
All right, so picture this. You step into the music room, sun streaming in, all these delicate details, and it's filled with ladies.
Sounds elegant. What were they up to?
Oh, the refined pursuits of the day. Writing letters, maybe composing a bit of music. Definitely some high society chatter. It was their space,
Makes sense. So where did the gentlemen disappear off to?
Oh, they had their own domains. The smoking lounge, the billiard room, Dark wood, leather chairs. You can practically smell the cigar smoke and hear that click of the billiard balls, can't you?
I can practically see it. Bets being placed, debates getting heated.
Yeah. Exactly. Very different vibe from the music room. It's funny, isn't it, how times have changed. You go to the Stanley today, and those spaces are still there. But you might find a group of women running the pool table, or a man lost in thought over by the piano.
Goes to show you, those old social rules, they don't hold up so well anymore. But the atmosphere, the history, that's got to linger, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can practically feel it in the air. Those echoes of laughter and conversation, even a bit of tension maybe from all those years ago.
You're making me want to book a room just to soak it all in.
Speaking of rooms, you mentioned a concert hall earlier.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, legend has it that F.O. Stanley, he built it as a gift for his wife, Flora. She was quite the musician, apparently.
Now, that's a romantic gesture. Puts a box of chocolates to shame.
Right. And the hall itself, it's supposed to be modeled after the one in Boston, the Symphony Hall.
The Stanleys would have known it well, coming from the East Coast.
Exactly. And there's this trapdoor on stage. Adds a bit of mystery, don't you think?
A little bit of theatrical flair. It seems like the Stanley was more than just a hotel. It was a real center of culture, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Music, art, socializing. Those grand hotels back then, they were like little worlds unto themselves, reflecting the times.
Speaking of which, we've talked about the main hotel, the concert hall. What about that manor house?
Ah, the manor house. Or as they call it now, the lodge. That's where you really see Stanley's vision for the future. See, the main hotel was only open in the summer, but the manor house, it had central heating right from the start.
He was thinking ahead, wasn't he? A year-round destination, maybe?
Possibly. But back then, the whole idea of winter tourism in Estes Park, it never really took off. Today, though, the lodge, it's open for guests. They even have a lovely brunch spot there.
Sounds charming. You know, speaking of guests, we can't forget the most famous one, Stephen King.
Ah, yes. 1974 off-season. The Stanleys practically deserted, and Stephen King checks into room 217.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was it about that empty hotel that particular time of year that sparked such a chilling tale?
He's talked about the eerie silence, the unsettling feeling, a vivid dream that inspired the whole thing. Almost like the hotel itself whispered the story to him.
And it wasn't just King. The Stanley, it's hosted all sorts of notable folks over the years. Emperors, musicians, you name it. Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, even Emperor Akihito of Japan.
It's like these grand hotels. They become part of the story themselves. Repositories of history, whispers of the past. Speaking of whispers.
You're going there, aren't you?
Oh, we can't avoid it any longer. The Stanley's reputation for ghost stories is almost as famous as The Shining itself. Where do we even begin?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because with the Stanley, the ghost stories, they're all tangled up with actual history. It's like another layer of mystery on top of an already mysterious place.
Right, like that gas explosion we talked about.
Yeah.
Some people say that maid, Elizabeth, the one whose last name nobody can quite pin down.
Lambert.
Exactly. They say she never really left. Still wanders the halls.
You know, it makes you wonder, that explosion, it must have been terrifying. All that chaos, the conflicting stories, maybe it left some kind of, I don't know, imprint on the place.
An echo of that energy, maybe. And then you've got the stories about F.O. and Flora Stanley themselves, their ghosts playing phantom piano music.
The ghostly concert. Classic.
And then the children playing in the hallways when there aren't any kids staying at the hotel.
It's like these places, these grand old buildings. They hold on to the past, don't they?
Well, whether you believe in ghosts or not, you gotta admit, those stories tap into something. A primal fear, maybe? A fascination with the unknown.
Oh, absolutely. It's like peering behind the curtain, getting a glimpse of what might be out there just beyond our understanding.
And you know, we can't talk about the Stanley's ghost stories without acknowledging the impact of The Shining.
Oh, yeah. Stephen King really put the place on the map, didn't he?
For sure. But it makes you wonder, was he just picking up on vibes that were already there? Or did his stories somehow make things even spookier?
The power of suggestion. Who knows? It's a question that keeps those paranormal investigators busy, that's for sure.
EMF readers buzzing, EVPs picking up whispers. I mean, I gotta say, part of the appeal, for me at least, is that we just don't know for sure. It's that mystery that keeps you hooked.
You said it. That creaky floorboard late at night, a sudden chill, that feeling like you're being watched. It's all fuel for the imagination.
It's what keeps those stories alive, doesn't it? And it brings us back to that idea we talked about earlier. Those grand old hotels, they're like time capsules, full of history, full of stories.
Not just a place to sleep, right? They've seen it all. Joy, sadness, love, loss, maybe even a ghost or two.
So what do you think? What's the takeaway for our listeners today? Is it a reminder to keep an open mind, to be a little more aware of the stories whispering around us?
Maybe. Or maybe it's just an invitation to embrace the mystery. To remember that even in this world of facts and logic, there are still things we can't explain.
Like the enduring appeal of the Stanley Hotel.
Exactly. It's more than just bricks and mortar. It's a legend, a story that keeps evolving, that keeps drawing us in.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Stanley Hotel. From its luxurious beginnings to that brush with tragedy to its spooky side, it's been quite a journey.
And you know, these grand old hotels, these stories, they never really end, do they? They just keep going, keep inviting us to explore, to imagine, to wonder.
Until next time, keep those imaginations running wild, folks. And who knows, maybe you'll have a spooky encounter of your own to share.